As an Australian, you've become a bit frustrated with Australia, I think it would be fair to say. You didn't give me all the details, but I'd love to understand a bit more about why that's the case.
Yeah, a can of worms on that one. But Australia, for me, you know, really has for so long represented some form of a lucky country now. I would sometimes, you know, go into an esoteric kind of like conversation around, you know, why that isn't the case. But for the best part, let's look at it from a place to bring up a family, to have a job that's secure, and to have a life that's generally day to day pretty consistent. And I think Australia has really been a great place for a lot of those, you know, those factors, I would say. But what I can observe is looking at my parents' generation, looking to my own, and you know, having had 20 years in the workforce and a long enough period to observe what has or maybe hasn't changed, or what is maybe, you know, changing not for the better. My conclusion has really come down to Australia being a place that for me is becoming too um, too laid back about things that I think will ultimately change the way that Australians have to do life. I've become more and more um, critical as I've seen the major economic play, which is property, turn into something that's just more to me like an Australian religion than it is anything to do with sound economics, or to do with like you know, an altruistic way of life for a family. I mean, for me, it's gone way beyond that, and because I've asked my own questions around it for so long, much before property was the trending element that it is now. For me, I think Australia is asleep at the wheel on so many layers, and especially economically. I subscribe to, I guess, an Australia that may have to go through a period of instability to really probably catch up to where I think many other places in the world have to deal with day to day. And my critique with Australia is that we're too willing to talk about something we think we know the answers for, and the majority of people have just been lulled into this hyper reality around either getting on the property market or stacking properties to what is already, you know, a portfolio, so to speak. And so I don't know how deep to go down the rabbit hole in terms of politically, but
Whatever
yeah.
comes to mind, totally fine. Open conversation. If we get cancelled, we get cancelled. That so be it.
Now, well, look, I mean, I think what I saw in and around COVID for me was a chance for me to step back and really observe the collective psyche. I'd travelled overseas the entire year of 2019, and basically spent a year almost like on a sabbatical, on a journey with myself to just reclaim, you know, some time and some perspective and some inner experiences, I guess. And coming back, and a few months, you know, after that, living in Sydney and watching the hysteria that sort of took over, you know, the country that I've lived in most of my life, for me, just has left me with more questions than answers. But these observations that have come through loudly is that Australia is a place that is really desiring government to create solutions for them. Australians, on the whole, really don't want to talk about the hard truths and take firm responsibility for their lives. And that's my critique on Australia, and my generalized critique on the trajectory in which I see it going. And I'm in this phase of like winding up the different things, different enterprises here in Australia, so that I can explore other regions and explore places that may present more opportunity than just the, work, buy property, narrative here.
It's very interesting, James. Thank you for sharing. I arrived in Australia 31st December 2019 and moved into central Melbourne and spent 4 years there. So was at the coalface, so to speak, of the complete carnage that, COVID zero policies and shit like this created in inner city Melbourne, and how it became a police state. It became a medical apartheid. It was absolutely mental what was done in the name of health. And
it was.
Ironically, recently I became an Australian citizen, and
congrats.
Thank you. It's not something I ever guessed would happen. Amazing when I think back to the 16-year-old Jake 20 years ago. Like, I would never have guessed this. And to some degree, I'm guilty of just playing the game. It's like, I'd like an Australian passport. My kids are all Aussie. My wife's Aussie. I'd like to be able to come and go as freely as possible. But there was a questionnaire that you had to do. And the test was quite extraordinary, because the government propaganda was just off the charts, essentially. It was like, on the one hand, you can come to our country as long as you agree to abide by our laws. By the way, we believe firmly in the liberty of people. And then started talking about like what type of marriages people are allowed to have, i.e. you can have same sex, but you can't have multiple wives. And you're like, hang on a second. So you believe in freedom, but actually if we come, we have to agree to your laws. And also, even if I come from a country where I can have multiple wives, I'm now not allowed to do that here. Is that freedom? And the contradictions, right, which is so obvious to me. Now, I still took the test. I still signed the paperwork. I still did what they asked me to do. So I'm complicit in this to some degree. But it was an amazing experience to see. I mean, I don't even know at this stage, if I'm honest, like whether this was actually true. But somewhere like Australia, that 2 centuries ago, was discovered by the Western world and has since built what it's built today through migration and what I would argue is pioneers, right? People who were willing to take huge risk and get halfway across the world on a boat and then start farming, start mining, start building.
That's right.
And what you have today is the result of that. And this is actually making my whole neck go up. It's like people came here and fought for it.
They did.
But what happened through COVID was a soft bunch of men rolled over on their sofas and did fuck all. That was actually pretty terrifying, because we are more, or at least what it seemed to be the case. It might be at Sunday lunch tables, people are a lot more pissed off than you would know, right? They might not be talking about it online because of all the censorship that happened. I don't know, but it was pretty scary when, like, my wife, who's 5 foot something, was walking through the center of Melbourne to meet her mum, got like handcuffed by a bunch of police for being outside of her house at a certain time of night. And there's just police everywhere, right? No guns. That's why the Americans are so interesting about the gun laws. For the first time in my life,
it's interesting.
I was like, do you know what? I think actually the gun laws aren't so bad, because there's a fairer scale in terms of like the bloat of the government. Whereas here, it's just like, govern me harder, baby. Let's go. And that was so obvious to me. And you're like, whoa, what happened? Did your granddad take risk? Fuck yeah, he took risk. Every single Aussie's grandparent took a lot of risk to get to this point. And they would be horrified if they saw what happened. So it's hard to then invest in a place, to your point, when you've witnessed that.